Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me today for our fourth part this week of Convertible Conversations, where we're talking about when victims become heroes. We started out talking about the situation with taking a knee or not during the national anthem. We kind of set that aside. We're going to come back to it, but not yet today. And we looked at Jacob and Esau and their whole situation, how it was thought that God loved Jacob and hated Esau, but we were finding out that that's not really the case. And Esau actually listened to God and did what God said, and even after Jacob stole his inheritance and cheated him multiple times, he forgave him, gave him grace, loved him unconditionally, accepted him and his family, welcomed him, and all of that kind of stuff. Now, there are a couple of main points to this story, at least two, neither of which I've actually ever heard taught by any religious teachers. I'm sure some have, but I've never heard it. First, Esau was somebody who doesn't harbor resentment. He forgives, he doesn't hold judges. He loves and he welcomes and he serves people who other people would think would be his enemy. So he's actually like God, who welcomes people who have rejected him, not liked him. He gives us all grace. Scripture says even while we were still sinners and rebellious and enemies in our own mind against God, Jesus died for us and did all the things for us. That's really important. Now, it's also important, the second thing that I've never heard anybody talk about in this particular instance is Hebrew Scripture, which we call the Old Testament, actually in some places says something different. It contradicts itself. But look at Malachi 1 verses 2 to 3. Supposedly this is God speaking. God says, I have loved you. Yet you say, in what way have you loved us? God says, well, was not Esau Jacob's brother? Yet Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. Now, God, who is love, can't hate somebody. So either that's a total fabrication or a mistranslation by people after that. It looked like God really used Esau in what we've talked about when he welcomed his brother who cheated him back. But here and in some other places, it supposedly says that God hated him. Now, we've studied before Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, where he actually quotes some Old Testament verses about hating your enemy and taking retributive revenge on him. And then Jesus says, but I say, and he totally contradicted those things. He said, I say, no. With your enemies, love them, pray for them, forgive them, serve them, do good for them. Because when you do, Jesus said, and this really shocked the people there, you're doing just what our Father in heaven does. That's the kind of God he is. He's not a God of vengeance and justice and retribution like you all have thought. His concept of vengeance and justice is grace and unconditional love and making all things right for everyone. So, how do we interpret these Old Testament passages that say, supposedly God speaking, saying, I love Jacob, but I hate Esau? Well, I actually sent a message to my friend Francois Dutoit, who is translating the Mirror Bible, and I asked him about this. And he wrote me right back, and he took me to his translation of Romans 9, 25, and 26. Here's what he has in his Bible. As God says in Hosea, I will call them my people who were not my people. I will call her beloved who was not thought to be beloved. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, you're not my people, that they shall be called sons of the living God. See, Paul is clarifying here the Old Testament quote that supposedly came from God. Francois goes on to say, Hosea voiced the heart of God when he said, I will call a people without identity my people. I will call those who thought they were unloved my darling. Even Esau, whom you said I hated, back in Romans 9, verse 13. And then he goes on to say, in parentheses, it was common among the Hebrews to use the terms love and hated in a comparative sense, where the former implied strong positive attachment, and the latter not positive hatred, but merely a less love or the withholding of expressions of affection, which were still not like God. And then in verse 26, he prophesies that the very same people who were told they're not God's people will be told by God that they are indeed the children of the living God. Now, does God change? No, we know that he doesn't. God never said he loved Jacob and hated Esau. He may have used a figure of speech that the Jewish people, that the people who wrote the Old Testament would have understood, not to mean love and hate, but that's been translated in English as hate and love. So, one of the things we're to learn from the way Esau treated his brother who deceived him and did all these bad things to him, we're to learn, as he did from listening to God, don't judge. Don't judge people even when we've been told by authority figures or even by the Bible that God hates them. Don't believe that. Just don't believe it. We always want to interpret the Bible through the lens of Jesus, whom the Old Testament writers didn't know. And Jesus actually said they didn't know the Father either. They didn't know what God was really like. Sometimes they thought they were hearing from God, and they weren't. They were hearing evil. And that can happen to us too. We'll carry on tomorrow. See you then.